Hey guys, Useless here, and today I kind of wanted to talk about Star Wars. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, I did not write a script for this video. I just didn't have time this week, so these are all just a bunch of disjointed thoughts running around in my head. I'm hoping it'll be coherent. But this is just off the top of the brain dome this week, so sorry about that. But basically, I want to talk about why I feel like, surprisingly enough, Star Wars is doing a better job at creating a shared universe than even Marvel. Now, you might be saying, blasphemy! The Marvel movies are an impeccable tour de force of cinematic storytelling. The fact that they did the Infinity Saga and it actually ended up being satisfying is one of the greatest cinematic achievements of all time. And I would agree with that. However, Marvel and its universe, it does not only comprise of the movies. You also have the ABC shows being Agent Carter and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and you have the Netflix shows that are, comprised of Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and Iron Fist. And technically speaking, those shows all take place in the same universe, in the same canon, technically, sort of. But it never really felt that way. On the other hand, Star Wars, obviously there's been before Disney bought them, there's been a bunch of other Legends stuff, but when Disney bought them, they very much they sort of picked what it was and isn't canon, and then they have gone on and everything since then has been canon. And today, I just want to make the argument. I'm not saying that Star Wars is better than Marvel. I personally just enjoy Marvel more than Star Wars. But, I don't know. It's which is one better than the other? I feel like it's better to discuss specific movies or TV shows or games in that respect. But I'm just going to make the argument that Star Wars is doing a better job of creating and fleshing out its universe and having everything feel important. They're doing a better job of that than Marvel. And I kind of just got this feeling after watching this past episode of The Mandalorian Season 2. It was Season 2, Episode 4. And it's the one where Mando, he goes to get the ship repaired, and then Carl Weathers and Gina Carano, they were like, hey, we'll repair your ship. Can you help us with the Imperial base? And then, oh yeah, by the way, spoilers for this episode, if you haven't watched it yet. And then they get to the Imperial base, and then they find out, oh no, they want the child because they want to get his blood because they're creating Snoke and blah 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 blah. And it's like, this one episode just has done, I feel, such a good job of making every sort of, I feel, type of content that Star Wars does feel important, if that makes any sense. Because in this one episode, they're tying it into the movies, which are, the premiere Star Wars product, you would argue that the movies are going to be the most important thing, right? Or at least you would assume. So they're actually tying in The Mandalorian to the movies. And so The Mandalorian, this show is important. They this, obviously it's important. It's not, it doesn't rely on, or at least it shouldn't rely on whether it's connected to the movies. It's, if the show's good, then that's good enough, right? But they are just stamping their foot down and going hey, no, as far as the canon of Star Wars goes and the overall lore, The The Mandalorian matters, and it's gonna connect to the movies. But then, with this show, they're also tying it into the Clone Wars, because, presumably next week, they're gonna meet up with Ahsoka Tano, and she was from the Clone Wars. I haven't, to be clear, I haven't seen the Clone Wars, or the animated show. But even last week, they met up with the Katie Sackhoff character. I don't remember her name, but she was a character from the Clone Wars. And while I was watching last week's episode, I was going like, man, I can tell you're an important character, but I don't know who you are. All I know is that you have a bad haircut, and you should get a better one. But again, the point that I'm making is that with this show, with The Mandalorian, Star Wars is establishing that all of their types of products, they're all important. And, they, like, neither one story is, like, more important necessarily than the other ones in terms of lore. Now, that being said, it's not done in such a way to where you have to watch all of these different things in order to appreciate them individually. No, that's not the case. Like, you can just watch the sequel trilogy, and that can be its own thing. And, in my opinion, you won't get much out of it, but, it's its own thing, and you can watch it and appreciate what they're doing with those things. You could just watch The Mandalorian and just appreciate it for what it is. At the core of the show, it's about Mando and the child. You don't necessarily need to know any of this other stuff to appreciate that. I'm assuming you could also just watch the Clone Wars. Like, that's its own thing. You could watch and appreciate that. But they're still building this world in such a way that it's all, like, equally as important. And that's just I'm surprised because, we talk about the movies and how much of a disaster they've been. I think it's fair to call them a disaster. In both in terms of quality and in box office. Like, in terms of quality, they didn't really have a plan with those movies, and they just kind of went along as they went along. And even in terms of box office, like, obviously they are all still incredibly successful, but the box office did start to go down. So, what was I saying? Yeah, no, but even with all of that, like, looking at the movies and even acknowledging that they might be a disappointment, you also have to just look at everything that they're doing. I hit my hard drive. You have to look at everything that they're doing and just how it's just an impressive... they're just doing impressive world universe building. But okay, so there's that, right? When we look at the MCU, I feel like we always talk about the MCU and talk about how it's this incredibly impressive, almost impeccable achievement of universe building, blah-bitty bloobity blue blah blah. And if we look at just the movies, it's almost it is the polar opposite of Star Wars. If we just look at the movies, yeah, it kind of is. They've done a really good job of creating this cinematic universe where it's all in the same shared world. But, you could just watch certain trilogies and you might be able to get something out of it. Although even then, that's kind of questionable as it's kind of gone on. But I don't know. I would still argue that you could still watch the Iron Man trilogy and probably enjoy it. You could probably watch the Captain America trilogy and probably enjoy it. You could you watch the Thor trilogy and have it be a cohesive trilogy? I don't know. Maybe. Who knows? Whatever. But the point is that with the movies, they've done a decent enough job. But when you look at it more broadly, they really haven't. When you look at at Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and, like, Agent Carter, it's just such a weird, disjointed, just mess of a situation to where these movies, the TV shows and the movies, it's just made very clear and very obvious that these things are not equal. Like, it is made very clear and very obvious that the movies are much more important than the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and all the ABC TV shows. When you look at the Netflix stuff, it is made very clear that the movies are more important than the TV shows. Now, that's not to say, and yeah, I should say that I'm talking about in terms of lore and canon, right? And I would argue that it's more so with the Netflix shows, or more so with the ABC shows as opposed to the Netflix shows, because at least the Netflix shows, as they went on, they basically decided, yeah, we're technically canon, but we're not really canon, so we're just gonna kind of do our own things. I didn't completely finish watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but at least from what I saw in its first few seasons, so maybe this changes. I don't know. You'll have to tell me if that's the case. But it always felt like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was kind of like running behind the MCU, like trying to catch up with it and trying to be up with the plot lines that were going on in the movies, but it just never really did. So it always just felt like this weird, it felt like this weird cousin of the MCU that nobody liked, nobody wanted to hang out with, but it was just there. It kind of just had to be there. And yeah, it just doesn't really feel cohesive, and it doesn't feel like it matters. And it's actually funny because one of the things that I do know about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is that at some point they introduced time travel. So you heard that right. Before Endgame, where Tony Stark discovers time travel, they had already done that in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So it's one of those things where it's like these two sects of the MCU, they're not communicating with each other. They're not acknowledging each other, but they still expect us to be like, oh wow, it's a connected shared universe. Isn't that cool? And it's like, it would be cool, but you're not doing a very good job of doing that. And you know, the same goes with the Netflix shows. It's like sometimes they'll like acknowledge the movies, but then the movies never acknowledge the Netflix shows. And it's just they want you to think that it's all the same universe when it doesn't really feel like it. So, yeah, I don't know. This was a rant. Did I make any good points here at all? I don't know. Let me know in the comments. But I guess really this is just something that I just noticed and that I just realized while watching The Mandalorian. It's like they're doing a good job here of having it all just feel connected and having it all feel important. I didn't feel like I had to have seen the Clone Wars in order to appreciate The Mandalorian, but if you watch the Clone Wars and if you're a big fan of the Clone Wars, then you would have been like, "Oh my gosh, it's the lady from the Clone Wars." And I saw a lot of people doing that, and I just think that's really cool. So I don't know. Tell me what you think about all this. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below. And goodbye.